Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to begin by congratulating you on your ascent to the chair and by expressing my sentiment that though while we're not members of the same party, I have every confidence that during your leadership, this committee will be more engaging and transparent and robust in the discussion than we were during the 115th Congress.
Thank you very much.
I will say that I had hoped that at one of our initial meetings, we would have been giving powers back to the states in the form of removing cannabis from the list of Schedule I drugs rather than taking powers from the states. I'll also note that with some of the new additions on the Republican side, I think the committee would be very favorable to that. If we were any more favorable, we might have to start our meetings with the Grateful Dead. So
let me just observe on your time that we may be discussing that fairly soon.
I look forward to it. Today is about voting. I wanted to tell the story of Anthony Grant. He's from the town of Eatonville, Florida, wanted to be mayor, ran, lost the vote on election day, but lo and behold, Mr. Grant got more than twice as many votes in the vote-by-mail system. We later found out that Mr. Grant had intimidated people who did not even live in the town of Eatonville to mail in ballots. And so my question is, I guess to Ms. Gupta, you say that your organization believes that we ought to restore automatically the voting rights of people who've engaged in felonious conduct. Mr. Grant was convicted of a felony. When he's done with his probation and community service and time, should we allow him to vote again?
The Leadership Conference would say yes. After people have completed their sentence and served their debt to society, the right to vote should be restored. I think it's
I'm going to reclaim my time. I'm a country lawyer from North Florida, but it doesn't make much sense to me that the way to make our voting system more secure and more trusted is to empower the people who have degraded that system to come back and participate in it. Another circumstance, James Webb Baker. Mr. Baker was from Seattle, but he wanted to influence elections in my state of Florida, and so he would send mailers intimidating people who'd participated in Republican efforts, really trying to threaten them if they would go vote. We caught up with Mr. Baker. He was ultimately convicted. So you think Mr. Baker ought to be able to vote even though he intimidated my voters in Florida?
I don't know the specific circumstances of that matter, but I think it's very important to recognize that felony disenfranchisement laws are a product of Jim Crow. They were born in explicit racism, with legislatures standing up in the 19th century, constitutional conventions deliberately bragging about their ability to use
right, but I'm not asking about those people, ma'am. I'm not asking about them. I'm talking about the people who go out of their way to intimidate voters. And what you're saying is that then we ought to let those people back into the system. And I noted in your written testimony, you said that the reason that we have to automatically restore voting rights to felons is because of our racially violent past. Now, H.R. 1, which you're here endorsing, does it make a distinction between people who've engaged in violent felonies and people who've engaged in nonviolent felonies in the automatic restoration of their rights?
The H.R. 1 restores voting rights to people with felony convictions who have completed their sentence.
So violent or nonviolent, right?
So it does not, and let me just add that when you say automatically get added to the rolls, there is nothing in H.R. 1 that replaces election officials' reviews of eligibility. They still review of registrations before they're accepted into the database.
But ma'am, I'm limited on time. But that review of eligibility does not allow them to delineate between the violent and nonviolent. So I'm looking at Anthony Bruton. Anthony Bruton committed sex acts with a 12-year-old at knife point. Then he threatened to cut her throat and bury her. He spent 5 years in prison for that offense. And so then, like, if Anthony Bruton under H.R. 1 were to move out of Florida and would have moved to the state of Missouri, where they had on the ballot a ballot question that dealt with whether or not your past criminal conduct in violent sexual acts would be considered in sentencing, would H.R. 1 have allowed Mr. Bruton to rape a 12-year-old at knife point, move to another state, and then vote against actions that would allow that to be considered at a subsequent sentencing?
Sir, our criminal justice system needs to hold people accountable for the crimes that they commit. What H.R. 1 does is uphold voting as a national symbol of equality and full citizenship. It would restore the right to vote to people who have completed their sentence and served out their debt per the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I get that. I just want to make the point that it's like everybody. In the state of Florida, we passed a ballot proposition that created a path for nonviolent felons to be able to participate in the process again. But what this does is this bill would allow someone like Nardo Harmon, who broke into the homes of people and raped 11-year-old victims. So he gets out of his house, breaks into somebody else's house, and rapes an 11-year-old. But if H.R. 1 were the law and Nardo Harmon did that, he would then be able to go vote against California Proposition 83 that would have required him to wear a GPS monitoring device. So I think that, like, there are some things you can do that are so bad. The degradation of people's right to vote, intimidating people from vote, raping children, that probably renders your right to participate in those decisions in the future. I appreciate the chairman's indulgence, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the